Good afternoon, everyone. Settle in. Today we are going to discuss one of the most emotionally charged, politically weaponized, and, ironically, least honestly taught subjects in modern historical education, the Spanish conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires in the 16th century. Now, before anyone begins mentally drafting a protest sign, let me be clear. This lecture is not an exercise in hagiography. The Spanish conquistadors were not saints. They were often brutal, greedy, violent men. But history is not a morality play with cardboard villains and flawless victims. History is about comparisons, context, and consequences. And when we examine all three, I will argue, carefully but firmly, that the Spanish conquest of Mesoamerica and the Andes was, over the long arc of history, a net benefit to human civilization. To understand why, we must first understand what was conquered. First, the pre-Columbian world, advanced but not innocent. Let us dispense immediately with the myth of the peaceful, egalitarian pre-Columbian paradise. This is a modern invention, not a historical reality. The Aztec Empire, centered on Tenochtitlan, was a marvel of engineering and administration. Its capital city impressed even hardened Europeans. Floating gardens, causeways, canals. It was a genuine imperial capital, but it was also a militarized slave state whose economy and religion depended on organized mass killing. Human sacrifice was not incidental to Aztec society. It was central. The Aztecs believed the universe itself would collapse unless human blood fed the gods. As a result, they waged constant wars, not primarily for land, but for captives. These so-called flower wars were designed explicitly to harvest human beings for sacrifice. Estimates vary, but conservative scholarly figures suggest tens of thousands of people were ritually slaughtered annually. Some estimates go higher. Victims were marched up temple pyramids, their chests opened with obsidian blades, hearts torn out while still beating, and bodies thrown down the steps. Parts of those bodies were sometimes consumed ceremonially, yes, ritual cannibalism, especially among elite warriors. This was not a fringe practice. This was state religion. The Inca Empire, by contrast, practiced less frequent human sacrifice, but it was still present, especially child sacrifice in times of crisis. More importantly, the Inca ran an empire built on forced labor. The Mita system conscripted entire villages into state service, often under lethal conditions. Conquered peoples were relocated en masse. Rebellion was met with exemplary punishment. Neither empire recognized individual liberty, political consent, or religious freedom. They were authoritarian states enforced through terror, coercion, and divine absolutism. This matters because conquest does not occur in a vacuum. Second, Cortés and the fall of the Aztec Empire. Enter Hernán Cortés, a minor Spanish noble with ambition, charisma, and an alarming disregard for orders. Cortés did not conquer Mexico with a handful of Spaniards alone. That is a fairy tale. He succeeded because millions of indigenous people actively supported him. Why? Because the Aztecs had made enemies of nearly everyone. Tributary states groaned under crushing demands. Captured warriors faced sacrifice. Entire regions lived in terror of Aztec military raids. When Cortés arrived, many indigenous groups did not see a foreign invader. They saw a liberator, or at least a useful weapon. The Tlaxcalans, among others, allied with the Spanish in enormous numbers. Without them, Cortés fails. Period. Yes, Spanish steel, horses, and firearms mattered. So did disease, particularly smallpox, which devastated native populations. Disease was tragic, but it was not intentional biological warfare. It was the result of two worlds colliding after millennia of separation. After brutal fighting, strategic alliances, and internal Aztec instability, Tenochtitlan fell in 1521, and with it fell the largest state-sponsored system of human sacrifice the world had ever known. That alone is not nothing. Next, Pizarro and the Inca, conquest amid civil war. The Inca Empire fell even faster, and for similar reasons. When Francisco Pizarro arrived in the Andes, the Inca were already locked in a catastrophic civil war between Atahualpa and Huáscar. The empire was fractured. Authority was unstable. Subject peoples were resentful. Pizarro captured Atahualpa in a bold, and yes, treacherous ambush. The Spanish then executed him despite receiving a massive ransom. This was morally reprehensible. There is no defending it. But again, Spanish success depended heavily on indigenous allies who wanted freedom from Inca domination. The Inca were not benevolent administrators. They were imperial rulers who relocated populations, suppressed local religions, and demanded labor at scale. The empire collapsed quickly because it rested on centralized authority without deep loyalty. Fourth, Spanish rule. Brutal, yes, but transformative. Now let us address the hardest part. Spanish colonial rule was often violent. Encomienda labor systems were abused. Greed and cruelty existed, sometimes on a horrifying scale. But here is what also happened. Human sacrifice ended. Cannibalistic ritual practices ended. Intertribal wars designed to capture victims ended. A written legal system emerged. Universities were founded. Cities were built. Christian moral frameworks, however imperfectly applied, introduced the idea that human life had intrinsic value, not merely ritual utility. The Spanish crown and church, contrary to popular belief, did debate indigenous rights. Figures like Bartolomé de las Casas argued that natives were fully human and deserved protection. Laws were passed, often poorly enforced, but unprecedented for their time, recognizing indigenous personhood. The result was not annihilation, but integration. Modern Mexico, Peru, and much of Latin America are not settler colonies in the Anglo sense. They are mestizo civilizations, blends of European, indigenous, and African heritage. Indigenous languages, foods, and traditions survived precisely because Spain did not exterminate native populations wholesale. The long view, civilization, and moral progress, history must be judged across centuries, not semesters. The Spanish conquest replaced regimes built on ritualized mass killing and coerced labor with societies that, over time, moved toward abolition of slavery, universal religion, written law, and integration into the global world. Was it clean? No. Was it just? Often not. Was it better than what came before? On balance, yes. Civilizations are not museums. They are moral systems. And systems that require constant human bloodshed to sustain the cosmos are not morally equivalent to those that eventually abolish such practices. To say this is not to excuse Spanish cruelty. It is to refuse the modern temptation to pretend that all cultures are interchangeable and that power is the only sin. The conquest of the Aztec and Inca empires was tragic, violent, and transformative. It destroyed worlds, but it also ended others that were built on slavery, terror, cannibalism, and human sacrifice. History does not give us saints. It gives us choices between flawed alternatives. And when we examine the evidence honestly, without romanticism or ideological filters, we see that the Spanish conquest, however ugly in execution, pushed the Americas into a broader civilizational framework that ultimately affirmed human dignity more consistently than what it replaced. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not propaganda. That is history, uncomfortable, complex, and real. Thank you.